The desert wind rolled in off the Nevada flats, hot and dry, dragging a curtain of dust across the main street of Virginia Crossing. It was late afternoon, the kind of hour when shadows grew long and men sought shade wherever they could find it. The saloon stood at the heart of it all, its swinging doors rattling faintly with each gust, the windows glowing gold from lamps lit early inside. Laughter leaked into the street, tangled with the thumping rhythm of a piano hammered by a player with more whiskey than sense in his blood. Glasses clinked, spurs jingled on the plank floor, and the air inside was heavy with cigar smoke and spilled liquor. At one table, cowhands roared over a card game gone sour, coins and bills scattered across the wood like fallen leaves. At another, a pair of drifters leaned close to a painted woman with two red lips, her laugh sharp as shattered glass. The barkeep wiped the counter with a rag gone gray with use, nodding at every order with the weary precision of a man who'd seen 1,000 nights just like this one. It was a scene as ordinary as dust in the desert, until the doors groaned open. They creaked on their hinges, slow and uneven, as if time itself had been dragged in from the street. Heads turned. The piano faltered, then limped on. The laughter dimmed, thinning into a silence that spread wider than it should have. A man stepped inside, the kind you'd swear the desert itself had carved out of stone and grit. His boots were caked with miles of road, his coat faded near to rags, and the brim of his hat cast his eyes in shadow. But it wasn't the clothes that stilled the room. It was the weight he carried with him, the kind that pressed against every chest, as if grief itself had walked through the doorway. He stood there a moment, dust sliding off his shoulders in a lazy cloud, and let the silence root itself. Men shifted uneasily in their chairs, trying not to meet his gaze. The barkeep's rag stilled on the counter. Even the whores near the backroom doors tucked away their smiles, sensing something colder than whiskey in the air. The man's hand hovered near his belt, not quite resting on the revolver there, but close enough that the threat was plain. His voice, when it came, was low and rough, like gravel spilling down a canyon wall. "Which of you," he asked, each word deliberate, "stole my daughter's life?" The sentence cracked like a whip through the room. The piano stopped. A coin spun to a halt on the card table, the clatter echoing louder than it had any right to. Faces froze, surprise, fear, confusion. Some men stared at their hands, others looked to one another as if the answer might be scrawled across their neighbor's face. A woman's sharp inhale cut the silence before she slipped into the shadows, skirts whispering across the floor. No one spoke. No one dared. Yet the question lingered, heavy as the desert sky before a storm. The man's eyes, dark under the brim of his hat, swept the saloon. They searched faces with the patience of a hunter, steady, relentless. The room tried to pretend ignorance, but guilt clung to the air like smoke. He could smell it, feel it, the way a man feels heat coming off iron. Someone here knew. Someone here had blood on their hands. The barkeep swallowed, tried to speak, and failed. His lips opened and closed before he busied himself with a glass that didn't need cleaning. One of the card players shifted in his seat, laugh lined stiff around his mouth, as if the words might drag him into view. Near the back, an old prospector's hands trembled around his cup. The stranger saw all of it. Nothing escaped him. He moved forward, boots dragging faintly, each step echoing louder than the last. The boards groaned beneath his weight, though he was not a heavy man. It was something else that made the floor complain, his presence, the fury held tight beneath the skin. He reached the bar and set his hand upon it, the leather of his glove cracked and worn. His eyes did not leave the room. "Whiskey," he said simply. The barkeep nearly tripped over himself to pour it, the bottle clattering against the glass. The men took it, lifted it, let it rest against his lips. But he didn't drink. Not yet. He turned slowly, glass in hand, surveying the crowd as though it were a jury and he their judge. "You hear me," he said, his tone quiet but sharp enough to cut through bone. "One of you knows her name. One of you remembers the fire. One of you laughed while she begged." He paused, letting the words fall like stones into still water. "And I aim to learn which." Men shifted. Boots scraped against the floor. A nervous cough broke out near the piano, quickly stifled. The stranger let the silence stretch until it nearly snapped, his gaze piercing through the haze of cigar smoke, fixing on each face in turn. The longer he stood there, the more unbearable it became. Fear has a way of showing itself in the smallest cracks, in the twitch of a hand, the dart of an eye. And he was watching for cracks. He drank then, slow, deliberate, the whiskey burning its way down like fire in the desert night. When the glass hit the counter, the sound was soft, but the room jumped all the same. The moon did not smile. He did not frown. He simply stood, anchored, as if his whole being was bent to one purpose. From the back corner came a whisper, too quiet to catch, swallowed by the hush that held the saloon. The stranger's head tilted, slow as dawn, and his gaze landed in that corner. Whoever had spoken stilled, their words drowned in their own throat. The stranger let them be. For now. He was in no hurry. Vengeance, he knew, was patient. The piano man tried once more. A timid note struck with hesitant fingers, but the sound clashed with the silence and died. No one wanted music tonight. Not with death standing at the bar. The stranger set a coin on the counter, silver dulled by age. The barkeep stared at it but didn't move to take it. The man's eyes scanned the room again, steady, burning, as if he could peel the truth off skin. He knew what fear looked like. He'd seen it once, years ago, in the eyes of the men who had torn his world apart. He would see it again here. "I'll drink," he said softly, almost to himself, "until one of you finds his carriage." His hand lingered on the glass, his thumb tracing the rim. "Or until I drag it out of you." The town outside rolled on, the wind carrying dust across the road, wagons rattling past, children calling out. But inside, the world had shrunk to four walls, a bar, and a man who carried grief like a weapon. And as the lamplight flickered across his weathered face, every soul in that room knew the saloon would not end this night the way it began. Word spreads like fire in a dry canyon. By the time the sun dipped low behind the rust-red hills, every man, woman, and child in Virginia Crossing had heard. A stranger had ridden into town with death in his eyes and a question on his lips. Those who'd been in the saloon spoke in hushed voices, their words soaked in the kind of or reserved for things larger than life. No one knew his name, but some remembered his face, roughly. A bit more weathered now. Leaner. But still carved with the same sharp lines of grief. An older ranch hand named Callum swore he'd seen that man years ago, before everything changed. "That ain't no stranger," he'd muttered behind his whiskey. "That's Elijah Grant. Used to run cattle west of Devil's Pass. Had a little girl. Wife died birthing her." Whispers took shape, latching onto the name like roots digging into dry earth. Elijah Grant. The widower who vanished after the fire. The man who'd buried a child, or tried to. The pieces came back in fragments, stitched together by rumor and memory. Some said his ranch was burned to ash one night by passing outlaws, men with no names and no mercy. Others said the girl wasn't killed, just taken. Screams in the canyon. A doll left in the dirt. And Elijah, they said, rode into the desert with blood on his boots and never came back. Until now. Inside the saloon, the stranger nursed his drink with a quiet patience that unsettled the room. The chatter was thin, brittle. Even the gamblers played slower now, their eyes more on the men at the bar than the cards in their hands. The piano had been silent since dusk. The only rhythm came from the ticking wall clock and the soft clink of glassware behind the counter. Elijah hadn't spoken much since his arrival, but he didn't need to. Silence, in his hands, had become a blade. It cut deeper than threads. He watched, always watched, faces, gestures, tremors in the voice, the way a hand trembled reaching for a bottle. There was a weight to him now, the kind men earned not by living long, but by surviving things no man should. Behind the bar, Hank the barkeep kept his head down, but his ears open. He'd been around long enough to know the shape of vengeance, and he saw it plain on the stranger's face. "That girl," Hank whispered to a waitress when the men stepped out to light a cigarette. "He used to bring her here once a month for supplies. Bright-eyed little thing. She wore red boots, remember? Used to chase grasshoppers out front while he bought sugar." People remembered. Not clearly, but enough. They recalled her laugh, light, full of life. A ribbon in her hair, maybe blue. They remembered her hugging his leg, her cheeks smudged with dust, tugging on his coat when he lingered too long at the store counter. That same girl was the reason he rode now with no smile, no softness left. Grief had hollowed him, carved him into stone, and placed vengeance at the core. Outside, the air turned cool as the desert night crept in, but inside the saloon, the tension simmered. Elijah returned, dusting ash from his fingers, and walked back to the bar. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. He looked at the card players by the hearth, four men too loud for their own good, one of them already well past sober. The drunk one, Benji Dunn, slurred through a grin as Elijah approached, eyes glassy with too much gin. You looking for ghosts, mister? He hiccuped. Ain't no justice in this town. Only whiskey and memory. Elijah stared at him a long moment, the corner of his mouth twitching. Not amusement, not quite anger. Just the ghost of something darker. You know who I am? Elijah asked. Benji chuckled. Don't need to. I seen your kind before. Dusty soul with a long shadow, looking to square the past with a bullet. Another player, Sam Crane, tried to hush him. Shut up, Benji, he growled under his breath. Man don't want words, he wants names. But it was too late. Benji leaned forward, clinking his bottle against the table. You want names, stranger? We all do. I had a sister once, taken by raiders out near the canyon. No one gave a damn. Sheriff said, leave it. Ain't worth your life. So I drank instead. Still do. Elijah didn't blink. Then you understand why I'm here. A pause. Sam Crane stood slowly, pushing his chair back. We don't want trouble, he said carefully. But if you're chasing ghosts, there's men in this town who don't like questions. Elijah tilted his head. I'm not here for questions. I'm here for answers. The silence tightened again. The fourth man at the table, a wiry drifter with sun-leathered skin and twitchy eyes, shifted uneasily. His hand hovered near his belt, where no gun sat, but the instinct betrayed him. You got a name? Elijah asked. The drifter's lip curled. Ain't your concern. Elijah's stare was steady, unflinching. It will be. Benji let out a low laugh, empty and brittle. Hell, he mumbled. Tell him, Tucker. The drifter, Tucker, froze. A heartbeat passed. Then two. Benji, Crane hissed, his voice sharp. But Benji kept going, the alcohol loosening his tongue faster than sense could catch it. You were there, weren't you? He said, voice louder now. Back when they rode in from the west. Burned down the Grant Ranch. Took the girl. You said, what was it, just a job? Wasn't that the line? Tucker stood, chair skidding behind him. You're drunk, Benji. Elijah hadn't moved. His fingers still rested on his glass, his body still as a coiled rattler. But the heat in his gaze could have melted iron. Tucker backed away, hands raised. I wasn't. Elijah stepped forward once, and the room held its breath. Say her name, Elijah said, low and cold. Tucker stammered. I don't know her name. That was enough. The weight of the moment dropped like a hammer. Benji realized too late what he'd done. The others at the table stood, uncertain whether to run or reach for iron. The room was a tinderbox, dry and waiting for the spark. And the spark had just been struck. Laughter came from the far end of the saloon, but it wasn't warm this time. It was jagged, sharp, like spur-scraping metal. 5 men lounged at the biggest table near the back wall, too calm, too loud, like wolves trying to prove they weren't afraid of fire. Their boots were propped, chairs tipped back, cards scattered, whiskey bottles half empty but their eyes sharp. They'd been watching Elijah since he walked in, same as everyone else. But unlike the rest, they didn't look away. They wanted him to see them. The loudest of them stood slowly, clapping his hands in mock applause. He was tall and lean, with a coat that hung like a black shadow and a jagged scar that split his face from temple to jaw. His eyes were pale and dead, like frozen water. The room didn't need an introduction. Everyone already knew who he was. Clay Matter. Gunman, raider, killer of cattle and men, and worse. Well now, Clay drawled, his voice as slick as grease and just as dirty. Ain't this a fine sermon? Man walks in all slow and holy, demands justice like he's the Lord himself. All we're missing is a choir. The others laughed, too quick, too hard. One of them kicked over a chair just to fill the silence with noise. But there was tension beneath it, thin as piano wire. Because Clay was mocking, sure, but he wasn't smiling. And neither were the rest of them. Elijah didn't flinch. He turned his body toward the gang, leaving his back to no one. His eyes fixed on Clay like a nail driven into wood. I'm not here to preach, Elijah said, voice even, low. I came for the one who took my daughter. Burned her home. Left her bonnet in the ash like it was trash. A breath caught in someone's throat across the room. Even the bartenders froze. Clay lifted a brow. Daughter, huh, he said. That what this is about? You think one of us has your little girl's soul in his pocket? She had red boots, Elijah said quietly. You would have noticed. She was 13, small for her age. Hair like her mother's, light brown, soft. She called me Pa and sang to the horses when she thought no one could hear. Clay's smirk faded slightly. Behind him, one of the gang, a round-faced man with too much sweat on his neck, shifted in his seat. Elijah kept going. I was up north that night, buying feed. They struck while I was gone. Came in fast, torched the barn first. I found the horse gate busted. Found her bonnet, torn, stained, by the well. It smelled like smoke and blood. The silence deepened. Only the wind outside dared move. Clay's fingers flexed, and his hand hovered just near his hip. Not touching the gun yet, but closer than before. That's a mighty sad story, he said, and now his voice had lost its humor. But this ain't no courtroom, stranger. You got grief, I get that. But grief don't give a man the right to point fingers. I'm not pointing, Elijah said. Not yet. The gang stirred, their boots scraping against the floor. The thin one beside Clay, name was Vic, if Elijah remembered right, licked his lips and whispered something to the men beside him. You remember her, Elijah said, stepping forward. Don't lie. You were there. I saw the tracks, 5 horses. I followed the trail to Wood Ebony Ridge, but the storm took it. You thought the fire would cover your sins. Clay's face hardened. That's a dangerous accusation. I ain't accusing, Elijah said, his voice suddenly colder, harder. I'm judging. The barkeep ducked behind the counter. A waitress dropped her tray and backed toward the swinging doors. Folks began to slip toward the walls, away from the middle of the room where the air was thickening with something awful and ancient, fear. Elijah's coat shifted as he squared his shoulders. The pistol at his hip gleamed under the lantern light, but he didn't draw. Not yet. He was still giving them a chance. You'll draw first, Elijah said, eyes on Clay. But only one of us is leaving. Vic took a step back. Clay, he muttered, voice trembling. He ain't bluffing, man. He knows things. Clay snarled, turning slightly. Shut your damn mouth. But Vic's hands were shaking. His words came faster now, crumbling under the weight of the moment. I didn't know she was just a kid. We were supposed to take supplies, spook the place. She ran, we thought. Hell, Clay said. The gunshot echoed like thunder, shattering the stillness. Vic's body jerked, then crumpled, his blood pooling fast and dark on the saloon floor. Smoke curled from Clay's pistol, the echoes still bouncing off the rafters. The room screamed in silence. Elijah didn't move. Not when the shot rang. Not when the body hit the ground. His eyes never left Clay. You silenced him, Elijah said softly. Like you silenced her. Clay's nostrils flared. He was weak. No, Elijah replied. He was human. Clay stepped forward now, slow, predatory, murder in his stance. You want revenge, preacherman, he sneered. Then go ahead. Draw. Elijah's fingers twitched near the grip of his revolver. His breathing was steady. The whole room seemed to shrink, until it was just the two of them. Rage met silence. Death stood between them like a shadow waiting to be claimed. I ain't drawing for revenge, Elijah said, voice cold as canyon stone. I'm drawing for justice. And with that, the night held its breath. The saloon hung in breathless silence, the kind that comes just before thunder cracks. Vic's body still lay cooling on the floor, blood soaking into the warm wood, his confession swallowed by the muzzle flash that ended him. Clay's pistol smoked faintly in his hand, but his eyes were fixed on Elijah, cold, calculating, waiting. Across the room, townsfolk pressed themselves into corners, ducked beneath tables, eyes wide with the realization that they'd just stepped into a storm they couldn't escape. Then someone flinched. It could have been the barkeep, or maybe one of Clay's remaining men shifting a foot too loud, but it was enough. The spell snapped. Guns roared. The saloon erupted in a chorus of fire and fury. The first bullet missed Elijah's head by a whisper, shattering a whiskey bottle behind him in an explosion of glass and smoke. He moved like a man half his age, fast and precise, his revolver clearing leather in a single breath. The first shot dropped the man to Clay's left before the outlaw even got his finger to the trigger. The second man dove for cover, too slow. Elijah's shot caught him through the shoulder, spinning him sideways into a table that shattered beneath the weight of his fall. The third outlaw managed to fire, the round grazing Elijah's arm, but the stranger didn't flinch. He pivoted, planted his feet, and fired once, clean, center mass. The men collapsed in a heap, coughing blood as the smoke thickened. Clay ducked low, sliding behind the overturned poker table, firing twice, bullets slamming into the bar with splinters flying. Elijah dropped behind a chair, reloaded with practiced hands. Every movement was measured, calm. There was no panic in him, no rage. Just the quiet, cold resolve of a man who had waited too long for this night to come. Outside, thunder cracked across the plains, the storm finally breaking. Lightning flashed through the saloon windows, casting everything in a flickering white glow. Clay popped up to fire again, too fast, too wild. Elijah was already moving. He rolled to the side, came up on one knee, and fired 2 quick shots. One struck the wall behind Clay, but the second clipped his shooting hand. The gun clattered to the floor. Clay roared, stumbling back, eyes wide with pain. He ducked behind the counter, dragging a second pistol from a hidden holster. "You think this ends with me, old man?" he bellowed. "There's more like me in every town between here and the Rio Grande." Elijah's breath came heavy now. Blood dripped from the wound on his arm, warm against his skin. Still, he moved forward, boots slow, deliberate. The smoke curled around him like mist, his shadow stretching long behind him with every flicker of lightning. "You stole everything," he said, voice low but sharp. "Her laughter, her peace, my life." Clay laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "I don't even remember her." Elijah stopped. He stared at the men crouched behind the bar, his own blood mixing with the sweat on his brow, and for the first time, Elijah's jaw tightened. He looked down, hand resting briefly over the breast pocket of his coat. Inside, against his heart, rested the locket, the one thing the fire hadn't taken. He had carried it across deserts and mountains, over rivers and through hell itself. He whispered now, the words only for her. "I promised I'd find them, Lily. I promised you justice." Then he stepped into the open. Clay rose fast, pistol up, eyes wild. But Elijah was faster. The shot cracked like lightning, tearing through the haze. Clay froze, staggered, then dropped his weapon. His knees buckled. He fell back against the bar, clutching at his chest, eyes wide with disbelief. Blood spread across his shirt, blooming like a red flower in the lantern light. He gasped once, tried to speak, but no sound came. Only silence. Elijah stood there, revolver still raised, chest heaving. The saloon was a ruin now. Chairs overturned, glass everywhere, blood staining the floor. The storm outside beat against the windows, wind howling through broken panes. But inside, all was still. Clay slid to the floor, his last breath rattling out of him like a dying wind. One final twitch, and he was gone. Elijah lowered his weapon. His fingers trembled now. The pain in his arm was sharper than before, radiating up through his shoulder, but he didn't cry out. He turned slowly, surveying the room. Every eye was on him. No one moved. No one dared. He took one step, then another. His knees buckled. He reached for the bar to steady himself but missed. The revolver clattered from his hand. He collapsed to the ground, breathing hard, his blood joining the others and spreading across the floor. Lantern light danced across his face as he lay there, staring at the ceiling, the world spinning at the edges of his vision. Somewhere, far off, he heard her laughter again. And then, silence. The dawn came slow and pale, bleeding light over the jagged horizon like a wound that would never quite heal. The desert, once cloaked in storm and shadow, now stretched wide and quiet under the first breath of morning. Wind stirred gently through the empty streets of Virginia Crossing, lifting the dust into soft spirals, brushing against shuttered windows and broken glass with the tenderness of a world trying to forget what it had seen. The saloon stood hollow, its doors crooked on their hinges, creaking with each passing breeze. Inside, the smoke had settled into the wood, the floor soaked with spilled whiskey and blood. Tables were splintered, chairs toppled, and lanterns hung dim, their flames long gone. The dead lay where they had fallen. Clay slumped like a broken shadow beneath the bar, his eyes open but seeing nothing. His men scattered around him, sprawled in twisted silence. No one had come in the night, not even the sheriff. It was only when the sun cleared the ridge, casting gold light across the street, that the first townsfolk stepped out. Hesitant, slow. A woman in a bonnet clutched her child's hand as she peered past the edge of her porch. The blacksmith leaned on his doorway, arms folded, face hard. The barkeep emerged from the alley where he'd hidden, wiping his hands nervously on his apron as he crept toward the broken threshold of his own place. They didn't speak. Not yet. The town was listening, waiting, as if the walls themselves held breath. And then someone moved. From the floorboards near the far end of the saloon, a groan rose, thin, ragged, but alive. Elijah stirred, his hand twitching against the blood-damp floor. His eyes opened slowly, finding the rafters above, the light filtering through broken windows. For a moment he didn't move. Pain pulsed through his body, sharp and unforgiving, but it wasn't what held him still. It was the silence. The kind of silence that only comes after vengeance. He pushed himself up on one elbow, every muscle protesting, ribs aching, breath shallow. His shirt was soaked through with red, but the bleeding had slowed. Somehow, against all odds, he was still breathing. He had not expected to be. But she had. He reached inside his coat with trembling fingers and pulled out the locket. The silver was tarnished now, the chain tangled from years of wear, but the hinge still worked. He opened it, revealing the tiny painted face within, his daughter, Lily, smiling in blue ribbon and red boots, a wisp of sunlight captured forever. He stared at her, and for the first time in years, his heart did not clench. With slow, careful movements, Elijah stood. The room spun, but he kept his feet. His boots dragged through blood and glass as he crossed to the bar. He paused there, glancing once at the body of clay matter lying still and stiff beside the shattered whiskey bottles. Then, gently, he set the locket on the bar. "She's at peace now," he said softly, voice like dry leaves in the wind. "Her justice is done." No one dared interrupt him. Townsfolk had gathered outside, some peeking through windows, others clustered near the edge of the street. No laughter came. Not anymore. That sound had been taken from them, burned away in gunfire and judgment. Elijah stepped outside into the light, and the crowd parted like smoke. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. They saw the blood on his coat, the iron in his spine, the weariness etched into every line of his face. But they also saw something else, something rare. A quiet in his eyes. Not peace, not exactly, but the end of a storm. His horse waited where he'd tied it the night before, dusty and still. He reached the saddle with effort, favoring his side, jaw clenched against the pain. A few men moved as if to help, but stopped themselves. Some things a man must finish alone. He mounted, slow and stiff, and turned the horse toward the open desert. Behind him, the saloon loomed, silent now, its doorway dark, its laughter buried under ash and memory. The locket gleamed on the bar as sunlight spilled through the broken window, catching it just right. A tiny flare of silver, like a soul rising from the dust. Elijah didn't look back. He rode down the street without a word, spurs tapping faintly, the wind catching his coat like wings. The townsfolk watched him go, hats in hand, mouths closed. And when he passed the last post, when the last hoofprint faded into the dirt beyond town, they turned back to the saloon and said nothing, because there were no words for what had happened. Only memory. And in that memory, a legend began. They say the saloon never laughed the same again. Not once. Not truly. Because those who stepped inside always paused at the door, felt a hush in the air, saw the shadow burned into the floorboards. And they remembered the night a man rode with dust on his boots and grief in his bones, a man who didn't shout, didn't threaten, didn't beg. He simply asked a question. And when the answer came, it came with fire and blood. They remembered the stillness after. The way justice had looked that night, not with a badge, but with a heart torn open and a hand steady on the gun. They remembered Elijah Grant, and they remembered the look in his eyes when he walked away, like a man who had finally buried a ghost and, for the first time, could feel the sun,